Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tales of the Darkness. Tonight, you're going to hear about the kind of fear that doesn't announce itself. It blends into routine. It waits behind normal sounds. And it only shows itself when you're alone enough to notice. Turn off the lights. Listen carefully. Let us begin. Story 1. The morning that didn't belong to me. My name is Rebecca, and for a long time, I believed I could trust my mornings. Not because they were good, because they were predictable. Same apartment, same hallway, same quiet street outside, same small habits I could do half asleep without thinking. That's why I noticed it immediately. The morning that didn't belong to me. I woke up with my heart already racing, like my body had been running before my mind caught up. My phone was on the nightstand. The screen was lit. I didn't even need to focus to understand the problem. I was late. Not a few minutes late. Late enough that the day was already ruined. I moved fast. Too fast. I got dressed in the dark, stepped into the kitchen, and poured food into my cat's bowl without turning on a light. I didn't even look down. I just listened for the sound of kibble hitting plastic. But the sound didn't come. I froze, staring into the dim kitchen as if my eyes could force the moment to make sense. Then I heard it. A slow, wet crunch. Not from the bowl. From behind me, I turned. My cat was sitting on the counter, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. The bowl on the floor was empty, and yet, something was chewing. The sound continued for 2 more seconds, steady and deliberate, like a mouth finishing a bite. Then it stopped. The air in the room felt dense, like the apartment had taken a shallow breath and refused to let it go. I whispered my cat's name. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. I told myself I was exhausted, that the sound was my imagination, that panic was making my senses lie to me. So I did what people do when they're trying not to fall apart. I kept going. I grabbed my bag from the chair near the door. It wasn't there. The chair was there. The spot was there. But my bag was gone, like it had never existed. My keys were on the hook, wrong hook. My jacket was folded wrong place. And the most unsettling part was that everything looked clean, not tidy, sterile, like the apartment had been staged to resemble my life. But whoever staged it didn't understand the small details that make it mine. I stepped into the hallway. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied. The walls seemed a little closer than usual, like the hallway had narrowed while I slept. I could feel the pressure of it on my shoulders. I locked my door out of habit. The lock clicked. Then, from inside my apartment, something clicked back. Same rhythm, same sound. I stood perfectly still, my hand still on the knob, my throat tightening. I waited for the second click, the one that would tell me I imagined it. It didn't come. I left anyway. Outside, the street looked familiar at first. Same row of buildings, same sidewalks. But there were no cars, no distant engines, no birds, no voices, just a thick silence that made every footstep feel like a mistake. I walked faster, trying to reach the corner where the bus always came, forcing myself to focus on something practical. My mind kept looking for normal details to hold on to. That's when I noticed the houses. They had curtains, but no light behind them. They had porches, but no furniture. They had doors, but no welcome mats, no packages, no signs that people went in or out. It looked like a neighborhood that had been built and then forgotten. Halfway down the block, I saw a boy standing near a street sign. He looked too still to be waiting for anyone. He was wearing a faded jersey, the kind that looked washed 100 times. His shoes were dirty, like he'd been walking for hours. He wasn't on a phone. He wasn't looking around. He was watching me. I slowed down. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Do you know when the bus?" He tilted his head slightly, not curious, evaluating. Then he said something so quiet I barely heard it. "You're early." I stared at him. "What?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he looked past me, over my shoulder, like he was listening to something behind me. My skin prickled. I turned quickly. Nothing. When I faced him again, he had taken one slow step closer. Not aggressive, measured. "You're not supposed to be here yet," he said. My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" His eyes didn't widen. His expression didn't change. His voice stayed calm, like he was reciting something he'd memorized. "It's not set up for you." I backed up a step without realizing it. The silence around us felt intentional now, like the whole street had gone quiet to hear what he would say next. I forced a laugh that didn't sound like mine. "Okay, I'm just late. I'm going to work." The boy's gaze shifted to my hands, to my keys, then back to my face. "You brought the wrong things," he said. And then, behind me, the apartment building door opened. I heard the slow hinge, the soft scrape of metal, as if someone was trying not to make noise. I didn't turn around, because I knew without knowing how that if I turned around, I would see something standing there. Something that had been waiting for me to notice it. The boy whispered again, softer this time. "You should go back to sleep." I ran. I didn't run toward the bus stop. I didn't run toward safety. I ran on instinct, like my body had picked a direction before my mind could argue. The street stretched wrong. Corners arrived too late. My own building looked farther away every time I glanced up, as if distance was bending to keep me out. My breathing sounded loud in that dead air. Too loud, like it was the only thing alive. I reached my building and yanked the front door open. The lobby lights were on. That should have made me feel better. It didn't, because the lobby smelled wrong, not dirty, not stale, just empty, like air that had never been breathed. I ran up the stairs, hands slipping on the railing, and reached my apartment door. It was closed. The lock was turned. I stared at it, frozen, feeling my heartbeat in my teeth, because I knew I had locked it, and I knew what I had heard in the hallway. I put my key in. It turned easily, too easily. When I stepped inside, everything was normal again. My bag was on the chair. My cat was on the floor, eating from her bowl. Kibble hitting plastic. A real sound. My phone was on the nightstand, dark and quiet. I checked the time. Only a few minutes had passed. I stood there, shaking, trying to convince myself it had been a nightmare that leaked into waking life. Then my cat stopped eating. Slowly, she looked up at the hallway. Her ears flattened, and from inside my bedroom, a voice whispered my name. Not loud, not close, just clear enough to prove it was real. "Rebecca." I didn't answer. I didn't move, because I knew the most dangerous part wasn't that something had spoken. It was that something in my home had learned the exact way my mornings begin. Next, we're going to hear the story of the breathing in the walls. Story 2. The breathing in the walls. My name is Ethan, and for a long time, I believed silence was harmless. I used to think a quiet room meant nothing was happening. That if you couldn't hear anyone, you were alone. That belief ended in the apartment I lived in during one of the most exhausting years of my life. The place was small and forgettable. One bedroom, a narrow living room, a short hallway, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. The walls were thin, the kind that carried sound easily. But at night, the building often felt abandoned. Most of the neighbors worked early shifts, so by the time I came home, everything was already dark and still. I usually slept on the couch, not because the bed was uncomfortable, but because the living room felt more open. I liked having space around me. I always left the television on low just enough to keep the silence away. The first night it happened, I woke suddenly with the feeling that something was wrong. The television was off. I knew I hadn't turned it off. The remote was still on the table, exactly where I had left it. The room felt darker than it should have, heavier somehow, like the air had thickened while I slept. As my eyes adjusted, I heard it. Breathing. Slow, deep, unnaturally steady. It didn't sound sick or tired. It sounded calm, controlled, as if whoever was breathing had no reason to rush. I sat up slowly, listening. The sound seemed to come from the living room wall, the one shared with another apartment. I told myself it had to be a neighbor asleep too close to the wall, the sound traveling through the structure. I muted the television. The breathing continued. I held my own breath. The sound didn't change. That was when unease settled into my chest, heavy and immediate. The breathing didn't match anything human. It didn't hesitate. It didn't shift. It didn't react to my movement at all. I turned the television back on louder this time. The breathing faded beneath the noise, and eventually, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. The next night, it returned. This time, I was fully awake, sitting on the couch with my phone in my hand. The room was dim. The television murmured in the background. Then the breathing started softly, almost politely from the same wall. I muted the television again and listened. The sound grew clearer. I stood up and pressed my ear against the wall. The breathing shifted. Not louder, closer, as if whatever was making it had leaned in, aware of my attention. I stepped back quickly, my heart pounding. The wall felt cold against my palm, colder than the rest of the apartment, like it held a different kind of air on the other side. That night, I barely slept. Over the following days, the breathing became familiar. Not constant, but persistent. It always appeared late, always when the apartment was quiet enough to notice it. If I made noise, it stopped. If I stayed still, it returned. And after a while, it stopped sounding like it was traveling through drywall. It started sounding like it was inside the room with me. Then it changed. One night, while brushing my teeth, I heard the breathing behind me. Not through the wall. Inside the apartment. I froze, staring at my reflection. The mirror showed my tired face and the open doorway behind me. Nothing else. No movement. No shadow. The breathing continued, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere near the ceiling in the hallway. I turned around. Nothing was there, but the air felt wrong in that hallway. Not cold, heavy, like there was more of it than there should be. From that moment on, the sound no longer belonged to one place. Sometimes it came from the bedroom door, sometimes from the corner above the couch. Once, I heard it directly behind me while standing at the sink close enough that the air against my neck felt warmer. I never saw anything, but I felt it. The air thickened when it was close, pressing against my skin like invisible weight. My chest tightened, my body reacting before my mind could explain why. It felt like the apartment was no longer just space, but something being shared. I tried everything to stop it. Lights stayed on all night. Music played constantly. The television never went silent. The breathing always waited. When the noise faded, it returned. Sometimes it returned the moment the room got quiet, like it was listening for the exact second I would stop distracting myself. One night, exhausted and angry, I whispered into the darkness, "Stop." The breathing paused. The silence that followed was different, focused, intent, as if the room itself were leaning toward me, listening. Then a voice answered. No, it wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It was certain. The breathing resumed closer than ever right beside the couch. I felt the cushion dip slightly, as if someone had sat down without making a sound. My stomach turned. I stood up so fast my knees hit the coffee table. The cushion rose again, slowly, like the weight had lifted in a controlled way. I didn't sleep at all after that. From that night on, it stopped hiding. In bed, I felt the mattress sink near my feet. On the couch, the space beside me compressed gradually, deliberately, like something settling in, getting comfortable. Sometimes, the breathing came from directly above me, as if something were leaning over my body, studying how I reacted. It never touched me. It didn't need to. The fear wasn't in pain. It was in the routine of it, the patience, the way it behaved like it had all the time in the world, like I was the one trapped. The final night in that apartment, I packed a bag and sat awake until morning. I didn't bother pretending I could ignore it anymore. I just listened. The breathing moved through the apartment room by room, slow and methodical. Living room, hallway, kitchen, bedroom, like it was memorizing the layout, like it was making sure it would still know the way around, even after I was gone. When the first light of dawn reached the windows, it stopped. The silence felt temporary, not peaceful, just paused. I left that day and never returned. I live somewhere else now. Different walls, different sounds, a louder building, more people, more noise. Most nights are quiet, but sometimes, when everything is still and the silence feels too deliberate, I hear it again. A slow, steady breath, not coming from the walls, coming from somewhere much closer. And that's the worst part. Once you notice it, you start realizing the sound was never trapped in the apartment. It was just learning how close it could get. Next, we're going to hear the story of the mirror that moved first. Story 3. The mirror that moved first. My name is Laura, and before this happened, I never thought twice about mirrors. They were just objects, glass and reflection. Something you passed without noticing, something that showed you what was already there. That belief didn't survive the apartment where I lived alone for the first time. The place was narrow and quiet. The kind of quiet that feels deeper at night, like it sinks into the walls and waits. A small living room, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a long hallway connecting everything. At the end of that hallway, directly across from my bedroom door, there was a tall mirror mounted to the wall. No frame, just glass. Cold, clean, permanent. It was already there when I moved in. I didn't choose it. I didn't question it. The first strange moment came on an ordinary morning. I was half awake, brushing my hair, staring at my own face. My eyes were unfocused, my thoughts still slow. I lifted my arm, and the reflection followed a fraction of a second late. Not a full delay, not something anyone else would notice. But I felt it immediately. That instinctive drop in the stomach you get when something is wrong, and your mind refuses to accept it. I tested it again. A quick blink, a head tilt, a small wave. Everything looked normal. I laughed quietly and blamed exhaustion. But after that, I started avoiding the hallway without realizing it. I took the long way around. I kept my eyes on the floor. Passing that mirror made my chest tighten, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. At night, it was worse. The hallway light flickered sometimes a weak, buzzing glow that stretched shadows and softened their edges. The mirror caught those shadows and held them, making the hallway look deeper than it really was. Longer, like it didn't end where it should. One night, I woke suddenly with the certainty that someone was standing outside my door. I lay still and listened. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. A thin strip of light spilled from the hallway beneath my door. Nothing passed in front of it. Nothing shifted. I opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty, except for the mirror. My reflection stood there, facing me. But it wasn't doing what I was doing. I was frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the doorframe. My reflection tilted its head slightly slow and deliberate, like it was studying my face. That single movement felt like a hand closing around my throat. I shut the door and locked it. Then I backed away, refusing to look again. I stayed awake until morning with my bedside lamp on, replaying that head tilt over and over until it stopped feeling like a memory and started feeling like a loop. The next day, I tried to be rational. I told myself it had been a dream, a sleep confusion, stress. That night proved me wrong. A sound woke me just after midnight. Tap. Pause. Tap. Not wood. Not metal. Glass. It came from the hallway. I sat up in bed, staring at the door, my heart racing. The tapping continued slow and patient, like someone knocking without hands. When it stopped, the silence that followed felt heavier than any silence I had ever known. From then on, the mirror did small things. Things that were easy to doubt, easy to explain away if you wanted to keep living inside your own head. Sometimes my reflection didn't blink when I did. Sometimes it smiled a heartbeat late. Once, I swear, it raised its hand before I moved mine. I stopped turning on the hallway light at night. I didn't want to see it clearly. I didn't want to give it more detail to work with. But it didn't need light. One night, I woke up and found my bedroom door open. I knew I had locked it. I sat up slowly, staring into the dark hallway. The mirror reflected my room faintly, catching the weak glow from the window. In that reflection, I could see myself in bed, and beside my reflected body, there was another shape. Tall, thin, darker than the rest of the room. It leaned over my sleeping reflection, its head tilted as if listening to my breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The fear wasn't loud. It was quiet and heavy, like a hand pressing down on my chest. Then the shape lifted its head and looked directly into the mirror. At me. I pulled the blanket over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to make myself smaller, trying not to exist. I stayed like that until exhaustion dragged me under. In the morning, the door was closed. The hallway was empty. The mirror stood still. I tried to pretend it was over. I left the mirror uncovered that day like an experiment, like proof to myself that I wasn't afraid. That evening, as I walked down the hall, I caught my reflection in the corner of my eye. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking past me, toward the bedroom behind my shoulder. I turned fast enough to make myself dizzy. Nothing was there. When I faced the mirror again, my reflection was normal, calm, perfectly copied, but my skin didn't believe it. That night, I tried to move the mirror. I don't know why I thought I could. It was mounted firmly, heavier than it looked. But I tried anyway. The glass didn't shift. Instead, the hallway light flickered once. And in that brief blink of darkness, I felt something very close behind me. Not a touch, not a breath, just presence, filling the space like smoke. When the light steadied, the hallway was empty again. I covered the mirror with a sheet and left it like that for the rest of the week. The apartment felt slightly better. Not safe, just less aware. Then, on my last night there, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Not from the hallway, from inside my bedroom. I sat up, frozen, staring at the dark sheet covering the mirror across the hall. The tapping continued, slow and patient, like it was reminding me it could reach anywhere it wanted. I packed the next morning and left. Before stepping out for good, I passed the covered mirror one last time. The sheet hung still, flat and harmless. But as I reached the front door, I felt the same pressure between my shoulders, the unmistakable certainty of being watched. I didn't turn around. Now I live somewhere else. There are no mirrors in my hallway. I made sure of that. But sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in a dark window or a turned-off screen, and it feels eager, like it's waiting for me to blink so it can move first. Next, we're going to hear the story of the hallway that answered back. Story 4: The Hallway That Answered Back. My name is Daniel, and I learned something the hard way. A home can get used to you. It can learn your routine, your timing, your weak points. And once it does, it doesn't need to scare you loudly. It only needs to respond when you're certain no one should. I moved into that place because it was affordable and quiet, the kind of quiet people usually pay extra for. 1 floor, a short hallway, a living room connected to the kitchen, and a bedroom tucked behind a door that always felt a little too thin. There was nothing dramatic about the first week. No cold spots, no shadows, no strange dreams. Just normal settling noises and the occasional creak that comes with older buildings. I started to relax. Then the hallway started answering me. It began with footsteps. Late one night, I got up to get water. I stepped into the hallway barefoot, the floor cold beneath my feet. I took 3 steps toward the kitchen. Behind me, 3 steps followed. Not an echo, not a delay. Perfect timing, like someone walking in the same rhythm, the same pace, just a few feet back. I stopped. The steps stopped. I held my breath and listened. Nothing else. No breathing. No movement. Just that deep, empty silence that makes your own heartbeat feel like a sound you shouldn't be making. I turned around quickly. The hallway was empty. I told myself it had been the building floorboards settling, a pipe shifting, some harmless structural sound matching my movement by coincidence. That explanation felt weak even while I believed it. The next night, it happened again. I walked down the hallway slower this time, testing it. Step, step, step. Behind me, the same. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved, it moved. When I turned around, there was nothing. It wasn't chasing. It wasn't rushing. It was practicing. After that, I avoided the hallway at night. I kept a bottle of water beside my bed. I tried to keep my life contained to the bedroom and living room after dark, but it didn't stay in the hallway for long. It learned the rest of the apartment. One evening, I was sitting on the couch watching something with the lights low. The hallway behind me was dark. I could see its entrance in my peripheral vision. A black rectangle leading toward my bedroom. Then I heard a soft sound from that darkness. A single step, not on the floor, not in the hallway, behind the wall, like something had placed weight against the surface itself, testing how sound traveled through it. I muted the television. The apartment went silent. Then the sound came again closer, like it had moved to the other side of the wall near the couch. A slow, careful scrape followed, as if something dragged its fingertips along the paint. My skin prickled. I told myself not to look toward the hallway, because looking would make it real. The scrape stopped. A moment later, the couch cushion beside me sank slightly, as if someone had sat down without making a sound. I jumped up so fast my knees hit the coffee table. The cushion rose again, empty. That night, I slept with every light on. The next morning, I tried to be rational. I checked the locks, the windows, the vents. I searched for anything that could explain the sounds, loose panels, animals, old pipes. Everything looked normal, but the apartment didn't feel normal anymore. It felt alert. That afternoon, I came home from work and noticed something small, but wrong. My bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it, not just closed locked. It wasn't forced. No damage. It was simply open, like a decision had been made while I was gone. I shut it again, harder than necessary. I left the living room light on all evening, telling myself it was a mistake. A lapse in memory. Nothing more. That night, I heard knocking. Not from the front door, from the hallway wall. 3 soft knocks, evenly spaced, like a signal. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. 3 knocks again. Then a pause. Then, very quietly, a whisper from the hallway. Not a clear sentence, just the shape of words, like a voice that didn't fully remember how to form them. I pulled the blanket up and tried to disappear into it. The whisper stopped. The next morning, there were marks on the hallway wall. Not scratches deep enough to be damage, just faint streaks, like something had pressed oily fingers against the paint and dragged them downward. They were at shoulder height, too high for an animal, too uneven for a normal smudge. I wiped them away. The cloth came back clean. The marks faded only slightly, as if the wall had absorbed them. That was the first time I considered leaving. But leaving costs money, time, effort. And like most people, I told myself I could handle one more week. That week was when it started copying me. It began with small things. I cleared my throat in the living room. A moment later, from the hallway, a soft sound followed, like a throat clearing back. I tapped my finger on the armrest while thinking. 3 taps. From the hall, 3 taps returned. I stopped moving. I sat still, hands on my knees, refusing to make a sound. The apartment stayed quiet. Then, without warning, it made a sound on its own. A single tap from the hallway wall. It wasn't echoing me anymore. It was starting the pattern. The worst night came when I finally broke a rule I didn't know I'd been following. I spoke to it. It was late. I was exhausted. I heard the familiar soft steps behind the wall and the faint tapping near the hallway entrance. Something in me snapped the part that wanted control. "Stop doing that," I said, louder than I meant to. Silence. Then, from the hallway, my own voice answered. "Stop doing that." Same tone, same rhythm, the same slight rasp I get when I'm tired. My blood went cold. I backed away from the hallway, my eyes locked on the dark opening, my heart pounding, afraid to blink for too long. The voice spoke again. Still mine, but not quite right. "Come here." It sounded like me imitating myself, like someone had listened for days and finally decided it could use my voice. I did not go into the hallway. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment, walking fast, not looking behind me. I stayed in my car until the sky began to lighten. Too afraid to be indoors, too tired to drive anywhere else. When I returned, the apartment looked normal, but I knew what normal was worth now. I moved out within days. I left furniture behind. I didn't care. I wanted distance. For a while, it worked. Then, weeks later, in a different place, I was walking down a different hallway toward my bedroom. Barefoot, quiet, and behind me, perfectly timed, came 3 soft steps. As if the thing that learned my rhythm didn't care which hallway I lived in. Only that I was still walking. Only that I could still hear it answering back. Next, we're going to hear the story of the closet that breathed. Story 5. The Closet That Breathed. My name is Sophia, and there is a sound I will never forget. Not a scream, not a whisper. Just the quiet, unmistakable sound of someone standing too close, when no one should be there. It happened in the house where I grew up, a place I always believed was safe. Not because it was special, but because it was familiar. Every step on the stairs had a reason. Every creak in the walls had an explanation, or at least, I thought it did. My bedroom was at the end of the hallway, small and simple. One window facing the street, and a closet built into the wall beside my bed. The closet door was old and warped. It never closed properly unless you forced it, and even then, it always drifted open a few inches during the night. That never bothered me, until the breathing started. The first time I heard it, I was lying in bed with the lights off, scrolling through my phone. The house was completely silent, the kind of silence that only exists when everyone else is asleep. At first, I thought the sound came from outside. Maybe a car passing slowly. Maybe wind slipping through a crack in the window. Then it happened again. Slow, steady, very close. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the closet. I froze, my phone slipping slightly in my hand. I held my breath and listened. The sound continued at the same calm rhythm, as if whoever was making it didn't need air the way I did. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Old houses make noise. Closets trap air. Fear fills in the gaps. I reached over and turned on the lamp. The breathing stopped instantly. The closet door was exactly where it always was. Open just enough to show darkness inside. No movement. No shadow. Nothing disturbed. I slept with the light on that night. After that, the breathing returned every few nights. Always when the lights were off. Always when the house was quiet. If I shifted in bed, it would pause. If I stayed still, it would continue. It felt aware. One night, exhausted and frustrated, I whispered into the dark, "Hello." The breathing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the room itself was waiting. Then something inside the closet shifted. Not footsteps, not fabric, just weight, as if something inside had adjusted its position. I didn't speak again. Over the following weeks, small things began to change. My chair wouldn't be where I left it. The closet door would be wider open than before, even when I was sure I had pushed it closed. Sometimes I found fingerprints on the inside of the door, faint smudges that vanished when I touched them. Then there was the smell, a stale, trapped odor like air that hadn't moved in a very long time. It only appeared at night, only when the breathing returned. It lingered near the bed, thick and uncomfortable, making it hard to breathe deeply. The worst night came without warning. I woke up unable to move. My body felt pressed into the mattress, heavy and unresponsive. I could breathe, but barely. My eyes were open, fixed on the dark outline of the closet. The door was fully open. The breathing was louder now, no longer hiding. It filled the room, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was inside no longer needed to pretend. The air shifted. I felt it move out of the closet, not walking, not crawling, just occupying space closer to the bed. The mattress dipped slightly near my feet. Something was standing there. Then I heard it. A sound that wasn't quite a word yet. My name. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a voice learning how to shape sound into meaning. Like something that had listened for a long time and finally decided to try. Tears slid into my hair as I tried to scream. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My chest burned as I struggled to breathe. The presence leaned closer. I felt it near my legs, then my waist, then my chest. Not touching, just close enough that my skin reacted on its own. And then, just as suddenly, the pressure lifted. My body unlocked all at once. I sat up gasping, my hand slamming into the lamp as it flickered on. The room was empty. The closet door was closed. The next morning, I told my mother everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't argue. She went into my room and stood in front of the closet for a long time without speaking. That same day, she removed the door. She said it was old, unsafe. that it needed to go. She never replaced it. Without the door, the breathing stopped. The smell faded. The room felt lighter, like air finally moving through a space that had been holding something back. Years passed. I moved away, lived in other places. I always avoided closets near the bed, always kept doors open. Most nights are quiet, but sometimes, when I lie awake and the room feels too still, I hear it again. Not from a closet, not from a corner, from right behind me. A slow, patient breath, as if whatever learned my name back then never needed the door at all. Closing Tales of the Darkness. That concludes tonight's stories on Tales of the Darkness. If you're still listening, it means the silence around you hasn't felt quite right for a while. That's usually how it starts. These stories don't end when the video does. They linger in quiet rooms. They repeat familiar sounds. They wait for the moment when you stop paying attention. So before you sleep tonight, listen carefully to the noises that return, to the breathing that feels too close, to the sense that something has learned where you are. If you want more stories like these, make sure to subscribe to Tales of the Darkness. Some things don't need to be invited. They only need to be noticed.